Chief Sophie Pierre is lauded for her work as BC Treaty Commissioner and Chief of St. Mary's Band. But you might not know of her approach to reconciliation, honoring the past, including residential schools, but looking firmly forward to a prosperous economic future for her people. Thank you, Sophie, for sitting with us today and having this conversation, especially in this particular area on this land. Can you tell me something of the history of the residential school behind us?
Sure. The physical building itself was built from 1910, and then it opened as a school for local and Indigenous children from Alberta and from interior of British Columbia. And it ran from 1910 until 1970. So for 60 years it operated as a residential school. So, you're going through like at least 3 generations.
And you attended?
And I attended here. I arrived here. I remember walking up this sidewalk with my mother at the age of 6. And I stayed here till I was 15. So, I spent 9 years here.
What was life like in the school?
Lonesome. It was a very, very lonesome place for a child to grow up. There was there's like the abuses that are now finally coming out and Canadians starting to understand. Yeah, those all existed here too. But I think that the thing that really stays in my mind is how there was just no love. I know how important love is, particularly because I'm a grandmother, and there's nothing I love more than spending time with my grandchildren. And I look at my 6-year-old granddaughter and I think, I don't know how my mom was able to bring me here. And she made the choice to bring me here because, and I mean, what kind of option? It's kind of like Sophie's choice. She could have kept me at home until the police or the priest or the Indian agent came and picked me up. So.
Did you personally experience abuse, emotional or sexual?
Lots of emotional, lots of mental abuse. I was fortunate, did not have any sexual abuse, not when I was in the residential school. Just as a child growing up in around adults who are alcoholics, yeah, there was abuse there too. Much abuse. But we're understanding now where that stemmed from. It came from here.
And so what a decision to make, to take a place that had some pretty bad memories and hurt for people and decide to make a resort out of it. Take me on that journey.
The Oblates were the order of priests that ran this particular, and they were Catholic, that ran this particular institution. And they made an arrangement with the federal government that they would turn over the building and 327 acres to the 5 bands of the area. So that was arranged, and people, the chiefs at the time, the leaders at the time, were quite happy about that decision. It didn't take us long though to realize that all we had on our hands was a big white elephant. I mean, seriously, like a big building like that, trying to keep all the facilities operating, and it was just impossible. Actually, from 1970 until 1990, it sat empty, and it was getting to look pretty sad. There were lots of damage on the building, and it was starting to just to be a really reminder of an ugly part of our history, really. And it was one of our elders in a meeting where people were then becoming more and more aware of that we needed to do something to revitalize our language, revitalize our culture. A lot of our parents at that point were starting to sober up, quite frankly, to get away from the addictions. The alcohol had grabbed our community so tightly, it was horrible. Her name was Mary Paul, and she said, if you think that you've lost so much in there, go back in there and get it, she said. Well, we didn't know what she meant. I mean, the place was falling down. It was horrible. So it took us a while. We eventually figured out what she meant. So this is a jointly held Indian reserve. with all the restrictions on development that every Indian reserve in this country has. We had all of those too. So one of the requirements is if you're going to do any development, everybody has to agree. So we had to take it out to each of the 5 communities and have referenda. We had 5 referenda.
And there were probably people who said, just tear it down, get it out of sight.
Absolutely. I mean, so we didn't have like 100% of people agreeing on it, but it was the majority from each community had to agree. They wanted the plan that we had put before them about building a hotel and making it into a business, as opposed to some kind of social service type institution that was going to rely on federal funding.
Residential schools, of course, recently have been in the headlines as people have discovered graves.
Yes.
I know you've had some concern about the way the media has covered this, saying unmarked graves as if it's something other than what it is. Can you talk about that?
Yes. It was a shock to all Canadians. So 3 years ago, my own community, we have the graveyard is just in the field back there, and that is our community graveyard. And so we were now in a position where we've been able to generate our own revenues from various enterprises that are going on within our traditional lands. And so we put together a plan about replacing crosses and replacing headstones that had been destroyed over the years, because that graveyard's a couple hundred years old. And so there were a lot of unmarked graves. My grandfather and my grandmother, their graves are unmarked in there because we always used wooden crosses. And wooden crosses deteriorate, wooden crosses burn. So we were in the midst of doing this when that announcement was made from the GPR work that was done in Kamloops. And of course, we had GPR work done here. And word got out that, yes, we have discovered, all these unmarked graves. Well, it was then mixed in with with the other story, and the media jumped on that and, made assumptions, jumped to assumptions that these were, more children that had been buried in unmarked graves. And it was really, really hard to have the media stop and listen to us. We said, we are dealing with a graveyard. Those unmarked graves are in the graveyard. And the reason they're unmarked is because we've always used wooden crosses. We are trying to bring back, and we've had people working on it to try to identify from old records and things, to try to identify, who's lying where, so that we can put the markers back in. And so I've heard all kinds of horrible things. I've heard some people say, well, why didn't you look after your graveyard all along? When you have a community that is already in huge disarray because of the addictions and because of the impacts of residential school, the breakup of families, you just have communities that are dealing with so many other things. We never had the resources. And we never had really it was never on the radar for us that was something we needed to deal with before now. But when it got on our radar, yes, and when we had the quite frankly, the finances, when we were able to hire people to start, doing the research and put together the GPR, bring that in here. When we were able to start doing that, that's when we did it. And it was just unfortunate that it got mixed up with what was happening in Kamloops. But I think, Carol, what really bothered me the most is that the media was so quick to turn away from the story, which was in Kamloops, about 215 children, in what was an apple orchard. Turn away from that story to say, where's the next shiny object? And just to assume that we were in that way. And then to start jumping right across the country. Yes, there are many of these places that the former residential schools where that search needs to be done, where the research and the history needs to be understood. But I think just the way that it was oh, I don't know. It seemed as if it wasn't enough to absorb what had been discovered at Kamloops and to deal with that. Yeah, so I think that's what, that and quite frankly, the other thing that really bothered me, and I kind of tore a strip off one of the reporters, is that there's such a desire, such a need for Indigenous people to always be painted as victims. And I just said, my God, I'm nobody's victim. I was victimized as a child. There's no doubt. I'm not a victim today. Today, and as a nation, we have taken back this place. It was our choice to do it. We've done it. We've created something better for our future. We've created this for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, because we're not victims.
How did you inside go from being a victim to saying, I am not a victim?
Because my mother told me that I was not a victim. Yeah. She was strong. Yeah.
And so you found your own strength as well.
Yeah. And I was also fortunate. I did have, and I always want to bring that out, that I had many mentors along the way. I had really, really good people that were, in my corner.
It has done one thing in terms of bringing forward awareness,
Yes.
because these stories of residential schools have been known,
Yes.
but they somehow were not front of mind or front of political agendas.
Yeah.
Now is the moment that it is back, and a lot of people are saying, how could we have let this happen?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we go forward? What should we do?
Yeah.
What would you say to average Canadians?
Well, I think that it's really, really important to understand that this is the history of Canada. Yeah. And I think that, like you said, that it's more people know about it. But to know about it, you also need to really understand. So you need to remember, it's not just the residential school, it's the whole history of Confederation.
So is truth and reconciliation the way forward?
It is. But only if we deal with the truth first. There's a reason it's not called reconciliation and truth. It's called truth. Because that needs to come out first. And it was a bit of a gut punch, really for Canadians to have that truth being brought out.
So what does reconciliation look like?
Well, it looks like this. It looks like when we're not having to, have people worried about some of the things that are going on. We just had that announcement yesterday about the health announcement around opioids and providing, safe places for people that are still dealing with addictions. And in every one of those indicators of health, indicators of wealth, of everything in Canada, Indigenous people are always in the basement. And if sometimes we're not even in the basement, we're in below the basement. We're always in that group where our statistics are worse than everybody else's. And I think that when we are starting to appreciate the truth of why things are the way they are, we can address them. And we're going to be living reconciliation without having to talk about it.
There's a bit of a struggle going on as to how much the various governments should be involved in the process going forward, and how much it's First Nations' decision and how these things are shaped. And when you were Treaty Commissioner, at one point, one of your recommendations was that on overlapping claims, that has to be resolved by First Nations.
Yes. It's not an overlap, it's a shared territory. And that's really what we need to be talking about. That was always my message when I was Chief Commissioner, is that we don't use the term overlap, we use the term shared territory, because we all know we have shared territory. We had to have shared territory in order to carry on trade, in order to carry on marriages and carrying on families. And yeah, we had those shared territories always, forever.
And so you're saying clearly that the way forward is not to say, okay, we'll divvy up this piece and divvy up that piece. We just have to acknowledge sharing.
Yes.
And that means you have to get consensus going forward on any decisions.
Yeah. And I think that right now that's difficult to do, is because people have become so polarized. You have people that are wanting to work with companies, and then the companies haven't done themselves any favors, by the way that the usual practice was to consult the Indigenous people last, after everybody else's plans were put in place, to come out and say, oh, this is what we're going to do in your territory. And, to the point today where they're realizing that really that's where they need to start.
Will we ever get rid of the Indian Act?
Yes, we will get rid of the Indian Act, but it's going to be replaced by the governing authorities of the Indigenous people. And you're already seeing that. There are some nations that are replacing the governing system that comes from the Indian Act and replacing it with their own. That's what Tawason's treaty is about. That's what Sliamm's treaty is about. That the modern day treaties replacing the Indian Act. And yes, I do think that at some point that will become history. I'm not going to see it, but I certainly hope it's going to be in the time of my grandchildren. And for our people here, I really hope that I'm still going to be alive when I see us getting rid of the Indian Act. We are so close. We are so close. And, it's when you get really close to something that you almost feel like you don't deserve, then it's really hard to just take that last step and grab it. And that's where we're at right now. So that we're having some of our own internal confusion about whether or not we go forward. But at the end of the day, all we've ever heard from our elders and, all from our parents and grandparents was everything to do with self-determination and self-governance, which is really all that I'm talking about, is self-determination. And that's what all people want for themselves. And so, we will get that.
And you talk about economic recovery and participation as being a big part of the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
So this has become a business success. Did it come easily? Was there a lot for everyone to learn, to put it together?
There was a lot to learn. We're still learning. And it's still struggles. We're definitely not where I thought that we would be after 20 years of operations. Of course, the last couple of years of COVID didn't help. But pre-COVID, we were getting to the point where we could really see the future. But for by the time that we had built out this place, we really we were so overstretched. We really didn't have the financial ability to be able to carry it on as a business. So it almost was to the point where we built it and we were going to have to sell it for somebody else to actually run it because we had no more money. Luckily, we were instead able to bring on 2 other Indigenous groups as partners.
When you talk to these young people, tell me if you see a change in the generation that is now coming through, and what are their worries or concerns?
Well, I think same as everybody else's. Right now, we have the young people that are doing really well, but we also have young people that are not doing well at all. Young people that have gotten caught up with the whole opioid crisis that we have here in British Columbia and really across the country. I had a mentor in one of the owners of a local drugstore called McDonald Drugs. Don McDonald was a very, very important person in my life that helped me to gain the confidence that, to do whatever. He was always just telling me, you can do whatever you want. There's nothing holding you back except yourself. He was just a very strong supporter, and I learned a lot from him, and I gained a lot of confidence because of him. And so it's that kind of support that I see that we have more of that's available within our communities.
So would you say you're optimistic?
Yeah, I am. I am. There's no doubt that there are times that I get frustrated and maybe a little downhearted, but pretty much, I've always been optimistic. I've always believed what I was told as a child, that whatever circumstances I was in, that they will get better. And this is funny because it was similar to the type of teachings that I got from the nuns. When things were difficult, they would say, "This too shall pass."
Yes.
So I say that, when things get tough, I think, okay, this too shall pass, and we'll carry on.
Your accomplishments have been recognized with many awards over the years, the Order of BC, the Order of Canada. Mm-hmm. What did they mean to you?
I just felt really, really proud that it's not me. Everything that we've done here, we've done as a nation. And yeah, I have, I'm kind of sort of the light, or the eyes, come on me, but I couldn't do this by myself, not at all, and so it is everything that we've done here, we've accomplished as a nation. And that's how I felt that Order of Canada was an Order of Canada, was a recognition of the Ktunaxa Nation in what we have accomplished. And I was sitting in a reception in Vancouver where we were doing our, it was the BC Achievement Awards for Aboriginal business. And I looked around and I thought, in this very room, we have the answer right here. We don't need to be looking out everywhere else to find the answers for the challenges and the just the things that still are keeping people down. We have the answers in this room, and we can do it ourselves.
Sophie, when you look back at your life, what do you hope you're remembered for?
I hope that I'm remembered for being kind, empathetic, understanding. All the other stuff it's okay, it's good, but if you haven't been kind to people, if you haven't been able to help people along, then it's trappings, the other stuff. So that's really, yeah. I like to be in the midst of kind people. Yeah. So I hope that I'm remembered for. I hope that I'm in that category.
You are indeed. Thank you, Sophie, for spending time with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for your interest. Yes, in bringing out our story.
Sophie Pierre, a BC legend.